How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, about a month ago, I went solo and I did an episode on complacency. I discussed 13 areas of complacency that can affect our effectiveness in corrections. Today, my guest is going to be Joe Pomponio, and today we're going to briefly just discuss the causes of complacency, and then we're going to give you a shared perspective on how those causes can affect us in corrections. But I'm also going to elevate the dialogue a little bit. I'm going to highlight it from different perspectives, from the officer's perspective, sergeant, lieutenant's perspective, and then we're going to go to prison management perspective. It's going to be a great dialogue. We're going to breeze through the causes real quick, but then we're going to revisit those causes when we talk about how those causes definitely apply in corrections, and also, as I said, relates to those perspectives we mentioned. Real quick, guys, if you get a chance, please check out my books that I have on the market. We have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book is available and on Amazon, used for training all across the country. We also have an ebook out called, called Crossing Boundaries, or Breaking Boundaries, sorry. This is about undue familiarity. The soft cover of that book is coming out shortly. Both these books will work well together if you're looking to get some training on inmate manipulation. Then we also have these books that are out right now from Blue 360 Media, How to Succeed in Corrections and Tips for New Corrections Officers and Their Supervisors. Guys, these books just got tons of advice. They're passage format with support quotes from people in the profession. So if you guys get a chance, please check out Blue 360 Media. And they're also publishing 3 more of my books, one on the Definitive Guide to Report Writing, which is almost on its way out. They all are almost on their way out. I believe they're available for pre-order if you want to check them out. And then we have Dealing with an Unruly Inmate. And then we also have Unlocking Your Leadership Potential. Unlocking Your Leadership Potential has kind of got the same format as this, passages with support quotes. Dealing with an Unruly Inmate is kind of like a story format, kind of very similar to this. And Your Guide to Definitive Report Writing is more like a text, but it's loaded with examples, so hopefully it keeps people engaged. What's up, Joe?
Hey, morning, Kemosabe. How are you?
Good. Joe, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections of 29 years and 6 months. Currently working as a assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
All right, Joe. We love having you, Joe. So I'm gonna kind of speed through a couple of things, and then it's going to be revisited again when we go ahead and really discuss 13 areas of complacency and corrections. But I want to mention, and Joe, feel free to stop me at any point, but I want to just quickly go over some of the causes for complacency and corrections. But before we do, I want to mention, guys, have in the back of your mind, if you have what I call purposeful intentionality in this profession, complacency tends to not even exist. I mean, it's true. Intention and purpose will outweigh routine and the familiar. Let's just do that. Okay, so these are some of the root causes. And, maybe we could just discuss it real quick. But these are some of the root causes that will go ahead and actually we're going to revisit anyway. So these are some of the root causes that could lead to complacency, not just in corrections, but just in general. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is then we're going to apply them. That's where the discussion is going to take place. So we got obviously the routine and the familiar, successes without incident, stress and burnout, a lack of immediate consequences, perception of low threat levels, over-reliance on experience. Then you got poor supervision and accountability. Then you got, hold on, I lost that. Wait. Then you got inadequate training and refreshers. Then you got cultural factors. And then you got micromanagement and over control. So guys, again, these are the causes. Now, this is where the bulk of the discussion is now going to take place. We are now going to talk about how these causes now affect 13 areas of where we find people falling complacent. Now, granted, Joe, I just want to start off with this. Do you feel that this is a good discussion? Do you think that a lot of us could fall victim to the routine and the familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. We fall victim to it every day, not just in corrections, but our everyday normal life. We become complacent in our own ways, whether it's, at the job or at the house. We get ourselves, like the first topic, you get yourself into a routine and that's kind of where you stay.
Yes. And guys, I figured this was the neat discussion. As Russ says, Russ says complacency is situational awareness perceived but not achieved. So we're really going to dive in deep and explore areas that we haven't explored before. Let me just delete that one little part. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to read what I have written first, and then we're going to go ahead and explore each section. So the first part I have is operational complacency. Now, operational complacency is different than procedural complacency, and we'll get to both. Operational complacency is a higher level what. It is the what that we do, not the how. So let me just read something real quick. Operational complacency, overlooking routine tasks and inspections essentials for the facility's overall functionality and readiness. This includes neglecting cell inspections, inventory checks, and equipment maintenance. So guys, we're talking about not speeding through the process, but rather neglecting it altogether. So causes. So we got familiarity with the routine task, absence of immediate consequences, and over-reliance on technology. So I'm going to read the three perspectives. I'm going to talk about why intentionality purpose matters in this, and then I would love to get Joe's overall thoughts on operational complacency. So from officers' perspective, officers may view these tasks as mundane and low priority, especially if they have never seen direct consequences of neglecting them. They might assume that operational tasks are more of a maintenance issue rather than a security concern. Sergeants and lieutenants' perspective, supervisors may see operational complacency as a failure to enforce standards and maintain discipline among their team. They may overlook these tasks, focusing instead on more immediate concerns like inmate management. Or in today's world, how about making sure posts are covered, let alone you doing what's supposed to be done on the posts, but let's make sure the post is at least covered. Prison management perspective, management may view operational complacency as a systematic issue that reflects the overall culture of the facility. They might be concerned with setting policies and ensuring that all staff understand the importance of these operational tasks and preventing larger security breaches. And why intentionality and purpose matters in this is because intentionality brings a sense of focus and importance to routine tasks. When staff understand the broader purpose of their actions, how a simple inspection can prevent larger security issues, they're more likely to remain engaged and thorough. Purpose drives motivation and a deeper understanding that every task contributes to the facility's overall safety and security. Joe, so when we're talking about operational complacency, we're actually talking about the overall task, not trying to take shortcuts while you're doing the task, but the overall task. And I know even at an agency level, when we're understaffed and you're trying to make sure the inmates get to those programs, but you may not have enough staffing to, try to get them out, you'll pull from maybe daily routines like searches and whatnot to go ahead and fulfill the need to make sure inmates get from point A to point B. That's just an example. But do you think operational complacency is active in our facilities today? The what?
Oh, I'm absolutely positive it's there in our facilities today, especially with the short staffing. We're so focused on spending so much time trying to rob Peter to pay Paul in order to get through our normal working day that we overlook the small things as far as the officers that we're pulling from simple posts such as entrance shakedowns or education officer or a visitation officer. We're so focused on making sure that we're pulling officers to get these simple mundane tasks done, that we're overlooking the importance of what they're supposed to be doing, and it becomes an everyday normal protocol, to pull this officer, to pull that officer, to get this done or to get that done. I'm almost positive it's pretty much it's going to be in all facilities.
Yeah, and guys, this actually falls into the basics of what we do. This is the basics of what we do. So with that said, sadly, sometimes we may not be so involved in following up in the basics of what we do until something happens. And then it causes us to go back and look to see if we've been doing these things. And in this case here, searches, inspections, routine tours. And at this perspective here, especially if I'm prison management, I may assume that these things are happening because, we're pretty much involved with higher level complex concerns that you're thinking that the basic whats are being handled at the most immediate levels. And if not, then I should have my supervisors in place to ensure that we're doing these things effectively. And the days that you can't, I don't want excuses. I want reasons. But sadly, Joe, this may not be discovered until it's too late. And if I'm prison management, and let's say I find out that this inmate had a weapon, or there was a bunch of weapons, let's say in a public area, one of the first questions I asked is when was that area last searched? And when people can't produce documentation, or they come up with excuse, well, we haven't done searches for a while because of our staffing. It's like, guys, we need to be aware of that. Like, here's another thing. I'm not giving an excuse. I'm not. Sometimes there is the urgent to push for, let's say I got to mandate somebody. So sometimes there may be an urgent pressure to, we've locked down this facility for multiple days. I got to get these inmates out. I got to get them moving. So today we may have to kind of hold back on searches a little bit, whatever it is. Let me just get these inmates out because we've been locked down for a couple of days. But with that said, you don't want that to become the norm. I get that from a management perspective, you may have to allow it at one point, but you don't want that to become the norm. So with that said, if we start getting laxed in the norm, and then there's this assumption, well, that's what management wanted. Well, management only wanted that for the one day. It was just because, they've been locked in for about a week, and now I got to get them out. So now we've kind of made this assumption that anytime we're under, we could just forget about doing searches or forget about doing inspections, because right now the priority is going to be to get the inmates out. So management has to make it clear that if they are pushing an exception, like robbing Peter to pay Paul, they don't want this to be the norm. They got to be totally transparent where, hey, I'll get the inmates out today, or maybe I'll take care of this side and this side still gets locked in. But I don't want any judgment call being made when it comes to not doing these basic functions without management being in the loop of that, because there's a tremendous amount of liability when we go to look at our records and realize that it's not being done. And the last thing you want is for your staff to come out and say, well, we had to get the inmates out. And they make this generalized assumption based on one initiative that you felt you had to make. And now the problem is now there's no documentation, and there's this crazy misunderstanding going around that every time we're under, we are focusing more on letting the inmates out than we are on safety and security.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense, Joe?
Absolutely. We're stuck in this. We're stuck in this. And I've been through it myself. They mandate, that recreation has to run. They mandate that these guys have to get to education. So we're collapsing positions in order to get this done. We're cutting down on the amount of rovers that we have. We're cutting our throats for non-basic security principle reasons. We're collapsing the position because one has to be escorted to education so we can go get his GED score. Meanwhile, I got a whole pod full of offenders running wild on their own because there's no officer there, because I had to collapse that position in order to get one single inmate escorted. And, we find all too often that, we're being told to just get it done because they don't want the grief and the heartache of being, getting complaints from above, such as the school district that may cover that institution, because we're not getting people there, and it's crashing their daily attendance averages, or because we got to escort one to medical at exactly 2:00, and we didn't get him there till 2:15 because we didn't have the staff to get him there to go take a blood pressure check. We're using officers from basic principle security duty post to do the non-basic functions. And, the administrator, like I said, and I'm sure it's happening everywhere. A lot of administrations like, I'm getting complaints. Why is this guy there? Just get it done. But when we get it done and something happens from that post that we had to pull that officer from, then it's like, where the hell was this officer? What, it's kind of it's total lack of communication, above and below. It's one of those do as I say, don't do as I do principles. And, and I know it's got to do with staffing. I don't blame the frontline supervisors one bit, because I've been there. I can show you shift rosters where I've had to collapse 3 and 4 positions just to do the most basic things like run recreation, to escort a panel of inmates to a GED graduation ceremony. Meanwhile, our searches aren't getting done, our rounds aren't getting done. Guys aren't getting fed on time. It snowballs, and it's one of those. It's all good while it's going good until it doesn't go good. And then everybody's like, well, what happened? All of a sudden we go through the stages of grief. What happened? How could this happen?
Denial.
Why did it happen? It's crazy, and like I said, I really don't fault either side, because the administration knows that we're short. The frontline supervision knows that we're short. We know that this crap has to get done. It's just the tactical part of getting it done and keeping it with, between the ditches and hoping that we don't jump the curb.
Well, I always mention in my books, you never want to sacrifice the urgent for the important. That's why, even if there's pressure, because I'm telling you something, guys, right now, once the people in the higher position start noting conflicts to what is supposed to be achieved to operational effectiveness, people may say, well, you know what? If that's the case, it's a safety and security issue, then we can hold back on graduation. We can hold back on this. But there are certain things that, like a medical check may be tough. You got to be wary of, not allowing that to happen. So there are certain pressures where administration will have to concede because the greater liability could fall on the agency. If I had a guy that needed to be checked by medical, an excuse that I didn't have enough staffing that day still holds the facility liable. It's just because at that point, the individual is supposed to get medical care. I have to figure out a way to make that happen, but I also have to make it known, as I mentioned, that this isn't going to be routine. I don't want staff to start realizing that there could be one effort because of the liability or the potential to fail, and that, this is now what's expected. So now what happens is we fall into complacent habits here based on what we assume is management's perspective. And it's great that we're having this dialogue here, because I don't think anybody in management truly says, let's sacrifice all safety and security to get these inmates out. I think somewhere along the line, that gets filtered into a very generalized assumption that gets spread out super quick without someone actually going back and asking management, hey, if we do this A, B, C, D, E, oh, okay, so then let me see if I can go ahead and, post these concerns up. And once you highlight safety and security, outside pressure really should have no effect on what needs to be done inside the facility. Now, granted, everybody that's watching this video can have a generalized assumption of management. I get it. But let's just, treat it as if this is how things are supposed to be done. If management has to push something that you may not agree with, I think management has to be transparent in that effort and also explain that it's a one-time thing. Let's get it done. And then eventually what I'll do is I'll keep voicing my concerns up. And with that said, I also think from the supervisory perspective on the floor, every time a sacrifice like this is being made, you don't want to slowly accept that as being the norm, but rather you still want to voice those concerns. If it's documenting a report, sending out an email, whatever it is, say, okay, be advised, guys, we had to run medical again, understaffed. And even if manager says, well, you're understaffed every day, it's still keep writing it. Because the problem is the moment you don't, it's going to become normal. And people are going to start to think, well, I guess they don't need that much staffing. It's like, no, well, then why did you stop writing it? Especially when it gets twisted into the normal routine. So I think this is great. You want to try to give both perspectives. But with that said, sometimes management does get pressure to have to produce with very limited resources. But I think that people should understand where that pressure is, because even management, people will be pushing on management to be outcome. And if you have good management putting in the effort and you know them and you trust them, but they're still coming back to the front line saying, I still got to get this done, then hopefully we figure out a way. But in the process, we make sure that this does not become the norm or the routine. So we need to be transparent of the specific condition as to why this has to be done today. I said medical
one of those, and I used medical as an example, but I have to say that over the course of my career, having good interdepartmental cooperation goes a long way.
Yes.
My medical has been awesome to me. I have no complaints about medical. I know they have stuff they need to get done. They know that I have stuff that I need to get done. And they've always have worked with me. I use that blood pressure check as an example. And, there's been times where, I'm in a chow hall by myself running chow as a lieutenant, and they call for this inmate. And, I'll walk to the telephone and say, hey, look, I have nobody right now. I'm in the chow hall. I'm just about done with chow. Give me about 15 minutes and I'll get them there. Not a problem, Lieutenant. Just let us know when you bring them. That's why interdepartmental cooperation and good relationships with your departments is very key, because if you have a good relationship with them, they will work with you as much as you work with them. And they understand that, and they understand how short we are. It's not like they have blinders on. They truly understand.
Well, you know what? What's funny, when you have trust in between departments, especially definitely medical and custody, we may no longer ask why. It's basically, if there's trust, safety and security no longer becomes an excuse. It becomes a reason. You know what I mean? Like if there's no trust, people ask why. Why? It's like, but if there's trust, I know Joe, trust me, he could have got it done if he could. At this point, we're going to have to maybe give him that extra 15 minutes. So guys, trust, it matters. I know a lot of times safety and security becomes the excuse, because we know it becomes a fail safe, but then you have the other departments that are depending on their initiatives to take place. So when you have good trust will connect those departments, which if you say safety and security, they know it's not an excuse, it's an absolute reason, and they're not going to question the why. They're going to learn to accept it because they know and trust the person it's coming from. Now, procedural complacency, I'll read a little bit different. Procedural complacency about the how, about how we do something. So again, it's not the what, it's the how we conduct self-searches, how we conduct inspections, are we cutting corners? To be honest with you, the first person that may recognize that you're complacent in those efforts is the person doing the how. This is a lot different than the what. Supervisors, we kind of get involved with the outcome of things, and once in a while we audit the efforts to make sure they're legit. But every day, the person doing the how committing to the efforts is going to know right off the bat, and it's an honest question inwards, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, or are you just taking shortcuts? So for here, and again, this is the how, this is not the what. That's the difference between procedural and operational. Failing to follow established procedures consistently. This can happen in both slow-paced and high-paced environments due to lack of urgency, or in the higher-paced facilities, burnout. So remember that. You got kind of people that, it'll never happen here, to people, it happens here all the time. And on the extremes of that, you can find complacency. So here's the causes. You could perceive low threat levels, and that's true on both sides. Because if nothing happens here, that's fine. But if it always happens, that means we're resolving it. And then that's stress and burnout, overconfidence and experience. That kind of may fall into the ones that are burnt out. They may have overconfidence in what could be a successful outcome. So the officer's perspective. Officers might skip steps to save time, or because they believe their experience allows them to know what's important. And they may see certain procedures as unnecessary or redundant. Hey, Joe, maybe you could think of that as we move forward. I'd like you to maybe explore that in just a second, though. But officers might skip steps to save time, or because they believe their experience allows them to know what's important. So maybe we can revisit that. Sergeant or lieutenant's perspective. Supervisors are responsible for enforcing procedures and may see procedural complacency as a direct threat to security. They might face challenges in balancing strict enforcement with maintaining officer morale, especially in high-stress environments. And that's true. That's 100% true right now, because the bulk of the work is in the how. So if you don't give people a reason why they're doing it, they're not going to be inspired to continue doing it and how it has to be done, especially if in their eyes, the results aren't as successful as they'd like it to be. Prison management perspective. Management views procedural complacency as a risk to the institution's overall safety and order. They are concerned with policy adherence and may implement audits or checks to ensure compliance, promoting a culture where following procedure is seen as critical. And last part, why intentionality and purpose matter. Intentionality ensures that procedures are followed not just out of obligation, but because staff understand their importance. When staff internalize the purpose behind procedures, seeing them as vital steps for ensuring safety rather than bureaucratic hurdles, they're more likely to adhere to them consistently. This mindset reduces shortcuts and reinforces a culture of diligence. There's a lot there in this one. So whatever you like to explore first, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, in general, you know, and I've said this I said this in a staff meeting, got myself in a wreck one time putting this out there in a staff meeting. It was, you know, I defined it as administration. I assume it's getting done. To the frontline supervision, I hope it's getting done. And to the frontline staff, holy shit, I hope I can get it done. And you know, it's something, you know, we talk about it every day about, you know, taking shortcuts, you know, just to be able to fulfill the basic mundane tasks, feed and chow, doing your security checks, maybe getting a cell to shake down if you're not, you know, assigned to 3 or 4 different cell blocks at the same time. You know, we used to have a routine, or not a routine, but we used to have a basic component where, you know, you're supposed to shake down 3 cells a day. You know, in a perfect world, if you're just one person on a single cell block, but because we're short staffed, you know, people are being assigned to 2 and 3 cell blocks, and, you know, are all these shakedowns getting done? Absolutely not. You know, I'm not one of those supervisors that had their head in the sand and thought that officer was getting everything done, because I knew damn well there wasn't enough time in the shift to get it done. You know, when you got chow going, rec going, cell inspections going, you know, and that's before any emergencies happen. You got one that's set fire to a cell. You got one that's trying to commit suicide. You got one that beat the hell out of a cellie. You know, and then, you know, on top of day room, you know, you still got to run day room, channel checks every hour. You know, there's so much going on that, you know, there is physically not enough time in the day. And, you know, the officers are trying to do the best that they can with what they have to get the basic components done. And the supervisors, you know, and you know, most facilities now, you know, I was one of them. I had to put my sergeants on duty post just to get them covered, you know. So, you know, I'm the only supervisor on a 2,500 bed unit that's available for any kind of calls, on top of emergencies, on top of feeding chow, you know, all, just the whole plethora. And, you know, staffing becomes a major issue in that regard, you know. And the administration, a lot of the administrations just assume that things are getting done until a report comes along, and they find out that it's not getting done. And, you know, the supervisors are doing what they can, especially if they're out there in the trenches with their COs. You know, there's been times where, you know, they've called me and say, hey, Lou, I can't get this guy out. I got so much going on here right now. I can't get this guy out to get him to medical. Okay, cool. Not a problem. I'm on my way. I'll come get that offender and escort him, just because I was that type of supervisor that, you know, I didn't sit in an office. I was out there in the trenches with the people, you know, so I would go escort them to medical or do moves or whatever needed to be done, whatever I could do to ease that officer's workload to allow them to get the basic security functions handled. So, you know, procedural complacency happens every day, and it's happening more so now every day. You know, look at the amount of homicides we've had just in the last 2 years nationwide. Look at the amount of suicides we've had nationwide in the last 2 years. Why? Because we don't have the staff to monitor the basic security functions that we had 5 years ago. You know, there's been times where I've seen 5 or 6 inmates on the same, on what they call constant direct observation when they claim they're suicidal. And there's supposed to be a person in front of that cell, each individual cell. There's supposed to be a single person. You know, we got one person trying to watch 5 and 6 people. You know, it's the procedural complacency has become, I hate to say it's become the norm nationwide, but it has. And the supervisors are doing the best that they can to help their people out, to try to overcome some of these challenges. You know, the administrations know that we're short. They've raised their concerns above them to the people, you know, in the ivory towers to let them know we're short. You know, we just haven't been able to find a fix that we can put our thumb on to get the amount of staffing we need to get ourselves out of the procedural complacency. And until we do that, unfortunately, this is the life of corrections right now.
Yeah, and I want to add something too. I think the shift from outcome to effort matters too. If you're management and you want to keep on pushing outcome, and expect your people to deliver the impossible, they will cut corners, or in some cases they'll lie and say they did it, as opposed to just saying, well, if I don't do it, I'm going to get chewed on. It's like, no, if you weren't able to do it or commit to 100% effort in doing it, then you should note why. I'd rather note that you haven't done it to the best of your effectiveness because of these reasons, or you haven't done it at all, as opposed to doing a check mark and saying you have. I mean, I think a lot of people believe that the outcome is what protects liability, and it's not. It's the effort. There are going to be moments where you can't do it.
And that's very true. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because you have an officer that doesn't want to forge the paperwork and say they got it done when they absolutely didn't get it done. But on the other hand, if they didn't get it done and a problem arises from them not getting it done, they're in trouble either way. So it's a double-edged sword for them. And I hate that they're put in that position. I try to do everything in my power to keep them from being in that position. And that's why it's so beneficial, and it's a must that the supervisors get out there with their staff,
kind of see what it is that they're dealing with. So if there is a concern right now, we could address it in the moment. But also, it's good to have that supervisor supported as well. Wasn't able to get out to ABC, now here comes Lieutenant coming in. That's true. So now you have the officer, you have support from the supervisor. Management would be very if they don't support that, because now you got the team explaining what it is, and that team knows a lot better because they're on the floor. And the other thing I want to add for procedural complacency is sometimes we get staff who want to be recognized. They want that outcome. And to be honest with you, a lot of what we do in the daily routine, it does produce an overall outcome that may not be tangible. I mean, it's quiet. That's what it is. I mean, again, you don't realize the basics are not being done until something happens. So the recognition really is in the maintaining. That's the key. The recognition is in the maintaining, not in the discovery. Effort, unfortunately, is to keep things maintaining in the right direction, keep that momentum going. You get a lot of staff that want to produce, and that's great. I get it. Keep that energy, but it also gets draining if it overwhelms you. Because then you're not going to. Then you feel that your production, if it doesn't produce an outcome, is not worth it. It's like, no, the effort is what we want. I want effort. I want to know that when you go into a search, that you are giving it 100%, regardless of what the outcome is. Because I know people that can give 100% and may still come up short. They may just found a better place to hide something, if we're talking about searches, and people that don't. And now the inmate does have a weapon, but regardless, is you have to focus more on effort and as opposed to outcome, and then you have to allow as management, you got to humble people, because they will find themselves getting burned out because all of a sudden they start lacking effort. That's the key. They start lacking effort, and as I said, the first people to recognize that are the people that's actually doing the job. So that's on you to notice first, and then the supervisor. So, I mean, imagine a supervisor may come and say, well, yeah, searches are being done. And management may say, well, how the hell do we miss this? Now I need you to go back and watch how those searches are being done. We don't need that as a wake-up call. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so the next one we got is environmental complacency. So this is becoming too comfortable with the work environment, leading to lack of vigilance. This can result in missing changes or hazards in the facility. So let's talk about some of the causes. So the causes here is routine exposure, familiarity, and kind of being in that environment, and the absence of observed risk. So the officer's perspective. Officers might not notice subtle environmental changes such as signs of wear and tear or potential hiding spots, seeing them as the responsibility of maintenance staff. That's crazy. And I can relate to that a little bit. I could. Sergeant lieutenant perspective, supervisors may overlook environmental factors due to their focus on personnel management and inmate behavior. They may not regularly check the physical conditions of the area. Prison management perspective, management may view environmental complacency as part of a broader safety and security protocol. They are responsible for ensuring regular inspections and addressing issues promptly to prevent incidences and why intentionality and purpose matter. Being intentional about regularly assessing the environment helps staff maintain high awareness levels. Understanding that their vigilance can detect potential hazards or prevent dangerous situations gives meaning to these routine tasks or routine checks, encouraging staff to remain observant and proactive. You know, when you think about a maintenance issue, let's say you have a bathroom that's out of service for a while and it's closed off. So the officer's like, obviously we can't use that bathroom. You got to use the other bathrooms. So what they do is, because they feel that it's been closed off, they don't check that bathroom anymore. They don't bother doing searches there, and they just forget. It's like, well, what's going on? Well, I haven't checked that bathroom because it's closed off waiting for maintenance to repair it. Yeah, but guys, you should be still checking it. You may think it's locked. You never know, but you should still be going there and check it. But I think this is funny too, because sometimes we'll notice that there's a concern. We write the concern up, and then let's say you don't get a response back immediately, but you figure, you know what, I've done enough. I wrote it up. That's all I have to do. Sometimes the supervisor may have to come in and hey, why is that bathroom still down again today? Okay, let's write another report. And not to be obsessive with, and I don't want to overwhelm the system. And maybe you can even spread it out. It doesn't have to be every day. But if you start to note this concern, and let's say the officer does document it at the beginning of the week, maybe it's good for a follow-up, somewhere through the middle of the week, and nothing happens, a documentation by the end of the week. You don't have to overwhelm the system with reports every day, but you need to do enough where you're documenting it, you're following up, and then the reminder. And then I think that has to be played out until it's done. The last thing you want to do is fall into where it's not being done. Then you just accept it, and then you wind up having this area that's out of use for years now, because we've gotten to the point to operate around it. See, my biggest concern here is that in an effort to be intentional and try to correct an issue, you wind up getting comfortable in the routine of working around it. I think that's the concern. What's your thoughts on that environmental complacency?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times maintenance has brought to my attention things that were going on the dorms. At one facility I worked, it was an open dorm. And, during the summers, they all have gas heaters. So nobody really, really looks to see if this gas heater is functioning or if it turns on, or and maintenance will come in to do their PMs and get ready for the winter season. And I get a call to go to the dorms, and the heater's not working because a convict has been wired up a tattoo gun line from the heater along the wall, covered up in toothpaste that you really can't see unless you are, hard looking at it. And there, there's a lot of environmental complacency like that, and maintenance has been great about notifying me, hey, this heater's been tampered with, or hey, this socket's been tampered with, things of that nature. And, it's one of those where, the officer's going in and actually doing their inspections, and they look up and they see the light's not on that heater, and they go, okay, the heater's not working. So they write it up as a deficiency. They don't dive into it to find out why, because obviously they're not maintenance. So when maintenance finally does come in and they go to look at the heater, and well, here's your problem. They done disconnected the power source and wired in a tattoo gun line, oh, here, by the way, here's your tattoo gun. There's a lot of environmental complacency, for things that we're not searching. And it's because, if it's broke, I wrote it up, I did my job. Now it's time for maintenance to fix it.
Yeah, and it really does come a matter of, because now it's being communicated to the other department of where their priorities are. Yeah. And they
think it's a normal procedure. They write it up, without, and most of them, they just write it up as a deficiency like they're supposed to. I'll have some that would pick up the phone and say, hey, LT, that, well, I got a heater over here. It's not working. I know it was working 3 days ago. Working now, so I'll go down and take a look at it and look to see if it's been tampered with in any way. And then, if it's been tampered with, then I'll notify maintenance to come over immediately and rectify it. But, for the most part, your frontline staff are doing what they're supposed to do. Most of them aren't maintenance qualified. Some of them don't know shit about heaters. Some of them don't know shit about AC or electricity or current or whatever, plumbing. So, all they know is it's broke. So they write it up, and it's an everyday normal thing. But unfortunately, it puts us in a routine of complacency as well.
And if I could put just from the perspective of the maintenance department as well, the sometimes staff, maintenance could be very overwhelmed in these facilities. A lot of them are old, a lot of things are falling apart. So sometimes staff will see their concern as immediate priority, and everybody kind of puts the same justification, safety and security, whatever it is, or where it's tough because maintenance is going to have everything with those same type of priorities. So I think we also have to communicate amongst each other and know what maintenance may be working on. So it's like, okay, I need them over here, but they're working on this. Okay, not a problem. I could wait then. I think that's where also the supervisors can help. Maybe they haven't gotten it to today, but it's not like they're not doing anything. What are they doing? Oh, they're doing, okay, well, that definitely takes priority over this. So then you can go back within the follow-up, tell the officers, hey, they're aware of it, they got it, but be advised, they're addressing this. Once they get the staffing, they'll come here. So in the meantime, I need you to be vigilant over here. Keep your eyes on it. And then, I think that's where that interdepartmental communication matters, where the supervisor can maybe go to the head of maintenance and say, hey, these are some of the concerns that are affecting my area. And then, it's not an effort to judge, just, what do you have going on? So we could try to figure out where I got to prioritize certain things. And that's a great discussion for the supervisor and the maintenance team to have.
Yeah.
And I think the complacent thing here comes in complacent assumptions that, one, that maintenance department is not doing anything, because that I'm sure that gets pushed out there, and then the maintenance department may be thinking custody puts everything as urgent. Everything's urgent. So how do we really know what is really urgent or what's not? So I think that's definitely something that we should revisit more. Then I have interpersonal complacency. So this is becoming overly relaxed in relationships with even colleagues, but more so inmates. This can lead to overlooking problematic behaviors or trusting inmates more than you should. Causes: desire for good relationships, avoidance of conflict. Yeah, there's complacency in that. And perceived low threat from known individuals. So the officer's perspective, officers may become friendly with certain inmates or colleagues, believing it fosters a better work environment. They may downplay risks of such relationships. I think you see this a lot with porters and staff, or people that, inmates that are assigned to do details that the officer is ultimately responsible for. So automatically that officer is in a position of obligation, because the reflection of the work, it shows you if the officer is effective or not. So I think, we'll get to that, but I think supervisors need to be able to separate that to some extent. Like, you don't want to be so obligated to an inmate. And basically, like, if I was a supervisor and I told an officer, yeah, you better get something done or it's your ass. Now that you're forcing that officer to have a sense of obligation to those inmates, because when the inmate does make it look good, they'll say, don't worry, Joe, we got you. We don't want the supervisor coming at you. And now you got this exchange here between this dynamic between this officer and this detail that really is leading down the wrong path, because the sergeant put extreme pressure. Now, again, that's how pressure could travel down. We don't know where the sergeant got the pressure from. But with that said, once you put it into that front line, and that front line finds the solution in those inmates, that you're going to have an obligation there. And there's definitely going to be some, we could say, complacency with that too, because, now they're becoming a resource for me. And I'm going to become very dependent on that resource for my job, technically. Perspective from sergeants and lieutenants. Supervisors may need to manage the balance between positive relationships and maintaining professional boundaries. They might see interpersonal complacency as a precursor to manipulation or undue familiarity, which I have. Prison management perspective. Management is concerned with the overall culture and ethics within the facility. They may view interpersonal complacency as a sign of potential security risk and ethical breaches, implementing training to reinforce boundaries, which is why I wrote those books. And why intentionality and purpose matter. Intentionality in maintaining professional boundaries ensure that relationships remain appropriate and do not compromise safety. Understanding the purpose of these boundaries that they protect both staff and inmates, help individuals navigate interpersonal interactions with care and awareness. And guys, this can happen at any level. Let's focus more on the inmates though in this one, well, because that's the main focus here. But that could happen at any level. That's why as you move to higher levels of authority, you want to be approachable, but you don't want to be that easily accessible. That's why as management, I always try to throw things back to that officer as much as I could. And then if I can't, the supervisor. But the last thing I want is for a supervisor to be in a constant position to deal with this inmate in a routine manner where they become familiar. And now I have to worry about that sergeant being compromised and the area of responsibilities and who they're responsible for fall into that as well. But what's your thought about interpersonal complacency?
Yeah, you should never trust the outcome on just an inmate's ability. We see that all too often, especially with porters, or in Texas what they call support services inmates, that work for staff, work as janitors, work as porters. At some point, it's they're going to wind up doing something they're not supposed to. Here we try to shake them up. In the system, we used to try to, we'd move them around every 6 months so that they don't get comfortable in the area that they're assigned to work. Such as medical, such as a office janitor, or a maintenance worker. The different positions. I remember one time as a correctional officer, just before I promoted to sergeant, I was assigned I was given the temporary duty of a paint squad officer. They wanted the gym and the hallways repainted, and they wanted murals and the whole works. They wanted to kind of spruce the prison up, which was a good thing. But unfortunately, the inmates I had assigned to me, half of them were gang members. And in the course of them doing their murals, they were putting their little gang tats in there too. And when it was said and done, I didn't inspect it as close as I should have, because from a distance it looked good. But when the major came in the following day and looked at the murals and seen the gang tattoos and the murals, he was not happy. And it was probably one of the worst ass eatings I took as an officer. So, you should always be vigilant and oversee the process. Never trust an inmate to follow your orders and expect something to not come out a little bit different to their taste. When I used to assign jobs to the officers, say like that, we had what we call a shower squad. They would go around and we had a little electric pressure washer, and they would go in and pressure wash all the showers. And I would tell the officer, hey, I want you to oversee these guys while they're over here. If that shower doesn't look good to you, it doesn't look good to me. Yes, sir, Lieutenant. And, they would oversee it. I'd come back and you couldn't see one bit of mold. You couldn't see a dirt mark. You need to make sure that if you have somebody in your department that works for you inmate wise, never, ever get comfortable with the inmate. Never let the inmate get comfortable thinking that, they can be replaced. Oversee everything, oversee the outcome, because at some point they're going to, like I said, an inmate. They're, their job is to beat us and our job is to catch them. So at some point they're going to do something that gets themselves in trouble and makes the department look bad.
The interpersonal communication, because it could lead into develop relationship, is definitely centered on, as Joe mentioned, as we're mentioning, just as the center of the dialogue, routine and the familiar. We have more access to inmates than ever before. We're going to be more interacting with them than we've ever done before. And I feel that when you become complacent in this, you wind up falling, even if it's a developed relationship, into some level of obligation. Because even if it's an inmate, let's say you were foolish enough to fall in love with, you get caught up, you maybe say, well, but he loves me. Well, what does that mean in return? For some reason, I feel obligation is at the center of that. To some, and I've written books on this. So I feel that you have to realize that pull to have to do something that's outside of your prescribed role. And then you got to ask yourself, why? Inmate saves my life. I got to get that inmate out of here. That automatically puts me in a situation where I feel obligated. And even though people may say, well, I'm okay with that. guys, it's our job now to protect you from those feelings of obligation. That's why we as management want to avoid any chance for a developed relationship to begin. But if there's a chance there could be one already going or already brewing, again, an inmate saves your life. That opens up the door for a relationship. I'm not saying that, the officer at this point will be unprofessional for falling into that, but it makes sense. You saved my life. How am I going to write you up for something petty now if you just saved my life? How am I going to treat you like every other inmate if you just saved my life? And even though there could be some that could easily do it, I'm not saying that. Of course, there's some that could easily do it. Why is management going to keep you in a situation where you have to do it? I got to figure out something. But with that said, I think the center of this interpersonal complacency are developed relationships where there's an exchange. Even if there's personal information being exchanged, because you've given me something, I'm giving you something. So I think here is definitely being intentional and purposeful with your boundaries that you're creating. And the moment you feel that pull to go outside that prescribed role is the moment that obligation is setting in. Because I'm trying to think, if you look at these relationships that go too far, somewhere along the line, obligation is connected to it. And I think that's a feeling that you recognize first. The person being played recognizes it first. But I also want to mention, from management on down to supervisors, whatever it is, you got to be wary that you yourself don't put your staff, as well as yourself, but also your staff, because you have authority over them, in positions where they could feel obligated to an inmate, which includes what we just mentioned before, the perfection of a detail, knowing that officer is going to have to now rely on those inmates to get that done. So like Joe said, all inmates could be replaced. And I agree with that 100%. But if I got my sergeant on my ass to produce, and this is the only inmate that can do it, that may give me pressure now to give this inmate a little bit more level of forgiveness, put him on a higher pedestal, where I have told my officers, hey, I trust in you. But I don't care how good an inmate is at their job. I'd rather have the detail fall back than you to keep an inmate on the job that you feel obligated to. Yep. So, and trust me, guys, there's inmates that, yes, will do just enough, but there's inmates that will go above and beyond because they want to be on that pedestal. And they'll say, I'll do it only for you and whatever it is. And then you're going to have that effort to have to pay him back. And I do not want any of my officers to feel that. So I will make sure that, yes, I want them to do what's expected of them 100%. And the moment they can't, they could tell me why and we'll work through it. But the last thing I want for their resolution to be when they can't do something at the highest or that level of expectation that we want, I don't want them going to a fucking inmate for that. I want them coming back to me and we can figure it out together. And that's extremely important to me because my first set of books was based on that. All right, let's go to communication complacency. All right, for communication complacency, let me open that up real quick. I lost my section. There it is. So, assuming effective communication without actively ensuring it. Now, this can lead to misunderstandings and a lack of coordination. So, let me talk about some of the causes here. So, you have familiarity with routines and colleagues, lack of immediate negative outcomes from poor communication. Officers' perspective. Officers may assume their colleagues understand their actions and intentions, leading to misinformation or uncoordinated responses during incidents. Sergeant Lieutenant's perspective. Supervisors rely on clear communication to maintain order and efficiency. They may view communication complacency as a failure in their leadership and on issues that can escalate minor incidences to major problems. Prison management perspective. Let me see. Management sees effective communication as vital for smooth operations. They might implement communication protocols and emphasize the importance of reporting and documentation to avoid complacency. And then why intentionality and purpose matter. Purposeful communication fosters clarity and prevents assumptions. When staff intentionally communicate, understanding that effective information sharing is crucial for safety and coordination, they ensure that all parties are informed and prepared to act accordingly. I got one area here. How many times do the officers on the floor believe that their local control point officer knows exactly where they are and they don't communicate to them when they're out of sight? But what's your thoughts on this, Joe?
Yeah, communication complacency is, the assumption that, that we're getting it done. I've seen that too many times where an officer is actually inside a cell, doing a shakedown, and the picket officer, has no clue because the door was already popped. So they didn't call the control center to pop the door. The door was already open because the inmates, in day room time. And, it's very easy to lose track, especially in a control center when you're monitoring 3 pods of 100 and some odd offenders. Communication complacency is really tough when you're not communicating with the people that need to know where you're at. I've seen it way too many times. Especially when it's telling somebody to get the task done. You tell them to get the task done and don't follow up, and some things take place in between that you didn't, if you're not concise with your instructions, and if you're not communicating with your coworkers, that can be an issue.
Yeah, and I want to add here, especially, this is extremely important, guys. Communication can come off not just verbal, but also in report writing, which we'll get to later on. So I don't want to cover too much on the report side, but we will explore that. But guys, communication here is more about clarity, not certainty, and alignment. That's the key. So, especially working partners, how do you not communicate with each other? And we can't always make the assumption that they know. I hate that. Well, they should have known. Stop. Because can you tell me how they should have known? I know, granted, you're telling me they should have known, but can you tell me how they should have known? And most of the time, people can't do that. I would love to see, that's on all aspects, interdepartmental communication, management on down, frontline on up, with our own peers. Communication is so key that we have to pretty much remove away from the assumption that people truly understand and really just make sure we are clear with what's expected. And again, just something as simple as when you're out of sight, if something happens, you're going to be mad at the LCP for not watching your back. But it's like, well, you didn't know what they were doing in the moment. They could have been looking at another camera. You don't know, but now you're mad at them. But having said that, I would go back in you and say, well, did you go on the radio and tell them you're going out of that area? No. So I'm not going to hold 100% on them because I don't know what else they were watching in the moment. They're the LCP. Granted, they could be watching you. They should, but there's other inmates roaming around. There's a bunch of other things that may catch their attention in that moment. So it's your job to be clear. And if you're going to go out of view, you need to tell them that. Also, another area of communication, because there's tons, but I'll give one more. When inmates are going from point A to point B, are we communicating, one, to make sure it's the right inmate that should go to point B? Are we communicating once the inmate gets to point B? I mean, this is something that we could assume once I let the inmate out, they'll get to where they got to go. It's like, yeah, but, or you know what? Oh, if that inmate goes there, not supposed to go to point B, somebody will check on that later and send the inmate back. And we'll get to that too, because there's team complacency here. Team complacency is basically expecting that the team will pick it up. That's the key. We'll pick up the mistakes. Let's get to the next one. But again, guys, communication on any level, but we just purposely chose those two. This is a good one. This is technological complacency. So it's an over-reliance in technology, assuming that it will always function correctly. And it's funny because a lot of people are being trained on using technology that they don't understand, basically how to do it at a very simplistic level when technology doesn't work. I mean, I've seen that when we had that huge shutdown recently and people were scrambling because they may know how to work those computers, but they don't know how to go back to the old, paper and pen model, when you had to kind of do things by hand. So for the causes, it's too much trust in technology's reliability and a lack of manual verification process. That's why you still need the old school people, because they're going to develop systems that align with the with how it needs to be done. So even though you may got the newer people coming in advancing everything, it still needs to somehow connect to manual operations, because if it doesn't, there's going to be a huge separation. And now the people that know how to do the job from the most core foundation are so confused that they don't even know what the hell route you're taking now. I've seen it. Now, from officers' perspective, officers might rely on security systems and surveillance, assuming these will alert them to any issue leading to neglecting manual checks, like an electrical fence that's supposed to go off or have an alert, like a shaker system. Sergeant lieutenant perspective, supervisors may expect technology to handle certain tasks, reducing the perceived need for manual oversight. They might not enforce manual checks as strictly. Prison management perspective, management might focus on integrating and upgrading technology, but also need to ensure that staff understand the importance of manual verification and that technology is not infallible. And why intentionality and purpose matters. Intentional use of technology means understanding its role as a tool rather than a replacement for human vigilance. By recognizing the limitations of technology and the importance of manual checks, staff maintain a balanced approach that integrates both technological and human element in security practices. This is a quick one, Joe. I mean, all because I put a camera in place doesn't mean the camera replaces the officer. What's your thoughts on this?
Or trusting the electronic locks on doors to actually lock, you know? Yeah. And then finding out that you don't know where the override key is when it doesn't work. Yeah. We should, I love the old school way. I guess I'm just kind of trapped in that. I don't rely on electronics. I like the old school manual key method. There's better accountability than there is now. But we shouldn't be complacent on our technology to know that it works or doesn't work. We shouldn't rely on that board just because it shows green we still need to be walking around, pulling on doors, making sure that they're actually closed and locked. How many times have we seen someone, seen an inmate jam their lock with a gum wrapper or with a piece of foil or, we rely way too much on technology, especially security cameras, depending on the systems, they're not always 100% reliable. They may lag. They may miss an important minute in an altercation or officer being assaulted. I guess because it's the computer age, a lot of people are and I understand trying to make the job easier. I understand trying to make it more fluid and more efficient. But to me, it doesn't beat the old school way of, walking and talking and pulling on handles and visual manual verification of things. And like I said, I understand we're in the technology age. I really do. But when all that shit fails, then they're stuck in that oh shit factor. What do we do? Well, do like we did 20 years ago, and we break out the key and we go and make it happen. Or we have to go back to a written report because our computer software has crashed and we can't put in an incident report. We still have a manual typewriter in our department, and people want to know why I won't get rid of it. And it eats crawl because it's taking up space, but it's Old Faithful. It's still there. It's reliable. It works every time I turn the power button on, and it's there as a backup when shit breaks bad.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern right now is that correction has become more complex. A lot of data now just to justify the practices that were in place. And the data becomes tough for, because there's so much activity happening at once that's tough for people to keep track of it. So technology does introduce a system where it's easier to implement. But with that said, it's not something that you could be relying on. And the sad thing is when that technology fails, there could be things that were never manually done before that now you're expecting staff to do when it's like they never done it that way before. Again, we have this world that has increased in what they want from us as correctional professionals. So now when they implement these new ideas, they implement it on the safety of technology will ride it out. And then all of a sudden, when technology fails, you expect the officers or the staff now to continue. And it's like, hey guys, we never done this before without technology, to keep track of all this manually is a bit insane. And I know a lot of people, as I said, to ease the road on staff, they do want to implement technology, and sometimes staff is so welcoming with that technology. I get it, but I still believe that we also should look at how practical this would be if the technology didn't exist, and how do we teach staff to do both, just in case the technology fails. Because I know we're going through all these changes, but we're also becoming very reliant on the technology for these changes. And when the technology fails, we're still holding staff to that same level of expectation where staff is like, hey, I've never done this before without that. And that's funny because even with the older staff leaving and the newer staff coming in, the staff is already coming into a world where technology exists. So I think, to be honest with you, they should be introduced first to how things are done at that manual level. And then just in case something happens, they're able to fall back to that. Let the technology be the second part of it all. And even though the newer people now will be able to advance the technology, think about how they will advance it. They'll advance it based on the foundation of the manual expectation. It's like, how can this support the job and not replace it? I think that's the key there too. We're putting technology in to be a support function, but not to replace. And if it gets to the point where we're looking at this technology and saying, yeah, man, thank God for that technology because I can never do it on my own, that's bad. Because
Right.
You just literally said you're relying on the technology to do the job for you. Supervisory complacency. So this is a good one. Supervisors' complacency. Supervisors becoming too relaxed in their oversight, assuming their team can operate without close monitoring. This, to me, is important, Joe, because this is where the supervisors are what ensure the basics are being done, and the basics are being done at the effectiveness that you want it to be done. So they're the ones that take care of the what and the how of those basics. The what may be done, routinely, but the how, you should have those audits coming in just to keep in play with how important these procedures are. We kind of touched that before when we talked about operations and procedural. So causes. So this is supervisors now. They trust and experienced team members. So the lack of immediate problems and also the workload pressure. You may have some staff say, I can't do it today and because I'm overwhelmed with work. Okay, we'll get to it next time. And then eventually that workload becomes a routine and now staff's never doing it. Officers' perspective. Officers may feel unsupported or lack guidance if supervisors are complacent, which could lead to their own complacency. And by the way, when the supervisors start becoming complacent, you're definitely going to start seeing the culture, and we'll get to that. A culture starts to become a complacent culture because the supervisors are what fights that momentum for the facility to fall back into this lax and complacent environment. So the supervisors are the ones that kind of put that resistance in, and they keep the momentum going to where we're not complacent. Sergeants and lieutenants' perspective, supervisors may feel that experienced officers do not need close supervision, believing their trust is justified. However, they might miss signs of stress or shortcuts being taken. Prison management. Management sees supervisory complacency as a failure in leadership accountability. They might implement checks and balances to ensure supervisors remain engaged and vigilant. I believe that's true too, because when I see a concern, a failure of the basics, it's crazy, but before I look at the person trying to implement the basics, I look at the supervisor who I'm trusting to check that the basics are being done. And why intentionality and purpose matters. Supervisors who lead with intentionality and purpose set the tone for their team. By being actively engaged and demonstrating a commitment to high standards, they inspire their staff to follow suit, reducing the likelihood of complacency spreading through the ranks. So obviously you model the behavior as a supervisor. Okay, I know there's a lot there, Joe.
Yeah, and supervisory complacency comes from not checking the process because we're relying on staff. We trust the staff that they're getting it done, and that's not always the case. The supervisor shouldn't be so complacent and automatically assuming that things are getting done that they should neglect walking around, spot checking duty post, looking at paperwork, looking at the different things, when it comes to inmate traffic or, whatever the case may be, and it's happened. It happens more times than but, and I've been a victim of it myself, and you would be surprised just by walking around spot checking things you would see what's actually not getting done. And here you thought all along it was getting done. So never be complacent in your supervisory duties to assume that things are getting done. Always make that effort to walk around and check on your staff, check on things while you're there, look at different things. There may be things you can point out to the officer while you're there on their duty post, just small stuff, but never be complacent in the fact and automatically assume that things are getting done.
Yeah, and guys, the communication also plays out here too. You know, you're going to have staff that's going to be burned out, going to be stressed, especially now we're dealing with concerns that are far out of our reach to solve. So you really got to keep them motivated, inspired. For my supervisors now, I'm looking for people that can really manage people. I mean, yes, you know, I get it. You know, you want people that know the task, but if I could choose task versus management of people, I'm going to choose management of people. I'm going to trust that people know how to do the task. I need someone that can keep my people inspired right now. I need people that can communicate buy-in to what's being done. So I think that's a real big part of supervisory role is when you start to see people falling back, it may not always be because they're negligent and don't want to do the job. It could be they're disenfranchised right now. You know, we're going through a bunch of changes right now where they may feel disenfranchised because the inmates feel more entitled. So that's not negligence. That's just a staff that needs to be motivated. So I think you also have to recognize the concerns of where that complacent habits, where the complacency is developing from. If it's developing from a disenfranchised workforce, then you got to get involved and motivate them. I think that's the big key. Remind them of what their importance is. Even if it comes to really just showing appreciation and also, you know, letting the other departments, you know, communicate with them, letting them know how important their work is. I think that's key too. You got to keep them invested, and also, you know, if they're starting to fall lax in the how, because I think that's the big concern, the procedural side of it all, because that may be something that definitely a supervisor has to be more vigilant with. Like I may look at the documents and okay, assume they're being done, but eventually I got to be more intentional in making sure that they're being done effectively. And I think appreciating the efforts, the routine efforts matters because it keeps people motivated. That's why I talked about recognizing milestones. 1,000 tours is worth recognizing. 1,000 searches is worth recognizing, regardless of the result. It's worth recognizing. Reporting complacency. I actually have a little bit of this in my book coming out, Definitive Guide to Report Writing, but failing to report incidents or unusual behaviors, believing they are insignificant. This may happen a lot now too, because staff is overwhelmed. They're getting mandated a lot, and the paperwork just adds to the frustration. I just want people to know that documentation also serves as reporting or catching what's trending. So for reporting complacency, you got the lack of immediate consequences, the normalization of minor incidences. So again, you're reporting things to know anything trending. That's another thing. So it may not have to be that, you know, you're looking to report something because you have to, but rather I may want to report something to see if there's a pattern of something being developed. That's the key too about reporting. And that doesn't have to mean it's official report. It could just mean a little bit of a log in your notebook. From the officer's perspective, officers may not report minor issues to avoid paperwork or because they do not see the significance, leading to a culture of underreporting. And there's a balance here because you don't want over-reporting either. That's why those personalized notebooks matter. Because if you got just a trend or a pattern of behavior, you need to note that. And the way you note that is, you know, maybe through informal reporting, which again, a notebook. Sergeant lieutenant perspective. Supervisors may not encourage reporting of minor incidences if they believe it will overload the system or if they downplay the significance themselves. We talked about that. That's in my book, guys. Definitive Report Writing. I covered that. Prison and management perspective. Management is concerned with having a clear picture of the facility security status. They may implement policies to encourage reporting and emphasize it's important for safety. And again, that's emphasizing reporting for if there's patterns. Because sometimes when something makes it all the way to an end result, management may want to look to see, hey, did anybody see this coming before it finally got there? And that matters to us. So those little informal notes doesn't mean it has to be officially reported, but I love it when officers say, well, you know what's funny? I noticed something like this on this date, and this date. Unfortunately, I may not have connected the pattern, but I knew something was up. And that does help us even after the fact. Why intentionality and purpose matter. Intentional reporting emphasizes the importance of every piece of information, no matter how minor it may seem. Understanding that these reports contribute to the bigger picture of a facility's security encourages consistent and thorough reporting, which can prevent small issues from escalating. And by the way, this is kind of where we got to know the difference between formal and informal. Formal is what's got to be written, and we get it. You know, documentation, whatever it is. Informal is more about trying to discover if there's a pattern or a trend that we should be aware of. What's your thoughts on reporting complacency?
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. Especially with the minor stuff, it doesn't happen as often as it should. I always told my officers, if you get down to a duty post and you notice something strange, don't be afraid to let me know. Because small details, small minor things can snowball into bigger things. I've had officers that called me about looking in a janitorial closet, and they found that the caulking was missing around the sink. And we go down and take a look at it, and lo and behold, we find contraband behind the sink. It's little details like that could possibly lead to big things. So never be afraid to report the minor issues. If you notice something obvious, it may be your detail may save a life. I had one officer that called me one time and said, "Hey, Lou, kind of strange, but I know this guy just got commissary, but I looked in his cell. He's got absolutely nothing. He doesn't even have a radio or a hot pot anymore." And, of course, the inmate didn't want to say nothing about it. And we pulled him out and shook down his cell. And lo and behold, we found a suicide note that he had written. He had planned on committing suicide that evening. And, it's small details that you report may save a life. It may keep somebody from getting hurt. That just the small details do mean something. You may not think it does, but somewhere down the line, it may mean something to somebody. So, I'm not saying that, you call every 20 seconds saying, "Hey, I found a paint chip missing off the wall," or "Hey, the window's been scratched," or, just stuff like that. But, if you are walking your duty post and you notice something that's missing, or maybe a piece of metal that you found bent somewhere, that possibly could have been used as a shank, don't be afraid to report it, because I'm telling you, small details sometimes save lives in a major way.
And by the way, reporting could even be just simply putting in a work order to get something done, like Joe said.
That, and also when it comes down to it, when the administration catches word of it, and they can always come back to the supervisor and say, "Hey, did you know about this?" "Well, yes, sir. My officer reported it to me," and we went down there and we checked it out. And it just shows that you got good communication, good connect with your staff.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is, and you yourself knows best, is why are you not reporting it? I mean, that's the key. Are you not reporting it because your excuse is going to be you're too busy that day, or you're just too tired? I mean, if that's the only reason why, then that's not a good enough excuse. I mean, as I said, I think the best way to balance that burden is between over-reporting and under-reporting is know what's informal and what's formal. I wrote it in my other book, Definitive Report Writing, which is coming out soon, is this may be more for note-taking because maybe there's a pattern here. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe start, writing some notes down and see if I could piece things together. Or, hey, this is so urgent right now that it requires immediate action. And at that point here, I got to report it and pass it up because we're going to have to implement something. Okay, so now let's go to training complacency. Okay, so let's dive into training complacency. It tends to be sometimes training is only liability-based training, but technically we need training as refresher. So here, believing that initial training is sufficient and not staying updated on new techniques or best practices causes overconfidence in existing knowledge, lack of refresher courses. Officer perspective, officers may believe their experience compensates for formal training, neglecting new techniques or changes in policy. Sergeant lieutenant perspective, supervisors might not prioritize ongoing training for their teams, assuming that experience outweighs the need for continuous education. And then prison management perspective, management must ensure that training is continuous and up to date. They view training complacency as a risk to safety and efficiency and may invest in regular training programs. Why intentionality and purpose matters? Intentionality and purpose matter because intentional commitment to continuous learning and development helps maintain high standards and readiness. Understanding that ongoing training is critical for adapting to new challenges and improving skills ensures that staff remain competent and capable of handling various situations effectively. This approach fosters a culture where learning is seen as a lifelong process, vital for both personal growth and facilities' overall safety and security. I got to admit, Joe, a lot of people do believe that their experience does compensate over training. And I believe, to be honest with you, you have to partner training with the evolution. If you don't, people will fall back, or those who haven't been trained may find more comfortability in practices that are now obsolete. But what's your thoughts on training complacency?
So training is one of our more fundamental and most important, aspects to keep us on point and on our toes. Training complacency has taken place over the years, due to the fact that every year in service there's really not any new processes, so the usual topics become redundant and kind of mundane. I think training should be more impactful. There should be more hands-on. There should be more role play versus textbook reading and testing, especially when it comes to firearms. Because let's face it, not everybody's good with firearms. Not everybody has firearms on their in their personal lives, and with the job, they have to be able to practice proficiency with it, and they only get to do that once a year. So we tend to just kind of roll through the process. I think training needs to be more in depth, and I think it needs to be partnered with experience. I don't think experience should be the only key that officers have to lean on. Personal experiences and professional experiences are good as long as we're doing it the right way. And and you've seen it as well, Anthony. And over time, even the vets fall victim to complacency when it's a process that there's no training for, a process that was already in place and they think is normal.
Yeah, and I want to add something to that too. So training is an intentional effort on both sides, one to provide and one to receive. I know sometimes there's a liability-based training where we kind of do things that are a little bit repetitive, and people tend to get bored because they've taken the same course 20 million times. So if you're a trainer, you got to get people investment. You got to look up new things, keep up with what's trending, maybe even provide some incidences at other facilities just to keep things relevant and new, so people aren't taking the same course for 25 years. I mean, your job is not just to train, but to keep people engaged. With that said, it also helps to kind of have that PowerPoint. I get it, but don't rely on it so much. Lean on your experience, bring in what you've learned because you're active and on the job. I mean, that's the one connection you're going to have with the people that you're training, is they're going to want to know, are you living it? So even when you have these new things that are now entering the profession, the people that train it can't be people that have never done it. They got to be people who've done it, who've been able to experience it. So now they can go ahead and teach from their own experiences, because the last thing you want is someone who's training not to believing it, definitely never having done it. And now you're trying to get them to train, and part of that training is buy-in. So I think that's another part about training complacency, is it's not even just about clarity of what's being taught, but are you creating a connection to what's being trained? This way people find value in what's being provided to them. If there's no connection, or you yourself as a trainer don't believe in it, then you shouldn't be teaching it, because that is not your belief does translate to the people you're teaching. So if you don't believe in it, that's going to translate. So they're not going to believe in what's being taught. So again, training complacency has got to go way above just a liability-based training. It's got to be very engaged. It's got to translate buy-in, importance. And it's also a good time to be open for feedback from staff. What's working, what's not working, try to make it an invested process. So at the end of the day, when the training is completed, you can go back and explain any concerns or maybe things that we could do better, because the training and class allowed for that type of interaction. I think that's key. And I think that would also be good, because people will look forward, hopefully, to those sessions where they're able to share their own experiences in an effort to make things better. And just, I think right now we need to remind people of certain core principles. Yes, I get it 100%, but we also have to allow for innovation. And that's where training can bring those things together. So this is what no longer works. This is how we can make it better in respect to what has been working. That's always the key, not in spite of what has been working, but in respect to what has been working. So I think training is a good spot to bring the old and innovative ideas in partnership. All right. So definitely don't want to take training has to be done, guys, and you have to be invested in the training. Health and safety complacency. So health and safety complacency is ignoring personal health and safety measures. So the cause is routine nature of task, absence of past incidences, and perceived low risk. Officers' perspective, officers may skip safety measures such as wearing protective equipment, believing it to be unnecessary or cumbersome. Sergeants and lieutenants' perspective, supervisors may not strictly enforce health and safety protocols if they see no immediate risk, leading to a lax of attitude among staff. And it's funny because with some supervisors, they may only react if something's said, as opposed to being proactive, catching it, and before someone says it, jump on it. I'm like that in my management style. If I catch it ahead of time before someone says it, I like to act, because I think that if you go to react once it's said, there's liability. There's liability because once you're aware of it, you can't be unaware of it. Prison management perspective, management views health and safety complacency as a liability issue. There it is. They are responsible for ensuring that safety protocols are followed to prevent accidents and injuries. Why intentionality and purpose matter? Well, being intentional about health and safety practices reinforces their importance and helps prevent accidents. Understanding that these measures are not just rules, but essential practices for protecting lives. Encourages everyone to adhere to them consistently. This mindset helps create a culture of safety where every individual understands their role in maintaining a safe environment. All right, what's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Especially in our occupation, health and safety is a must. The three S's I've always preached in the penitentiary is security, safety, and sanitation. Safety is definitely a priority, especially nowadays with the amount of fentanyl and the amount of illegal contraband that's coming in, like through the mailroom. I've always preached to the mailroom staff about wearing gloves, regardless of what their cares are, because all it takes is just that one time for somebody to accidentally overdose on something that was dusted on a letter. As far as the officers are concerned, I've always preached to them, but always keep at least 2 pair of rubber gloves on you, latex gloves or latex-free gloves on you at all times, because you never know when you may have to go hands-on with an inmate who's either suffered an assault or, some sort of medical distress. You don't know what kind of diseases these guys are carrying or what they may have communicably. Cell searches was another hot topic. I've told them never run your fingers along a bed edge. Always use a tool. I've always preached about getting those foldable dental mirrors, the little miniature ones, magnets for razor blades. Safety is so needed in our occupation that it really can't be preached enough.
I agree. I'm gonna say something right now, guys. I think I definitely do believe that we have to not just monitor ourselves, but monitor each other. I mean, one of the things they said here, people that find comfortability in not wearing their vest, if the facility has issued vests. Mind you, if the facility has issued vests, you better wear them. Because if something happens to you, the facility is going to say, well, he wasn't wearing their vest and hands are free. So even though it may be uncomfortable, you're wearing that vest because if something does happen to you, your family's going to be taken care of. I mean, that's the ultimate goal here. And these are things that we fought for. But with that said, I do think that's something that we do actively have to be intentional with every day. And as supervisors, I truly think that your job is to truly be proactive with that. I would like to say the officers as well, but definitely as a supervisor, you can't walk past something and then say you didn't see it. You are responsible for too much to say that you could just walk by something nonchalantly and decide not to do something about it because it's too much work, or, well, not today, I'll get to it, because today I'm just tired. It doesn't work that way. As a supervisor, it's part of the responsibility. It's prison management, 100% it's your responsibility. You get paid to be aware. Absolutely. You get paid to be aware. Yep. And you yourself know if you saw it or not. So when you decide not to act and something does happen, even if nobody knows if you saw it or not, you have to live with that. You have to live with that. So what could have been 5 minutes of paperwork tends to be a lifetime of regret. All right, let's get to the next one. Team complacency. Now, for team complacency, if you're relying too heavily on the team for catching mistakes or handling tasks. I want to mention, I have this in one of my books. Corrections is a layered process, which means that there's multiple fail safes before A can get to G, there's B, C, D, E, F. But with that said, you can't live a life depending on those fail safes. Those fail safes are there to protect us. But if you are assuming that you can do the least amount of effort, because don't worry, they're going to be caught at B or caught at C or caught at D. Well, what if everybody has that one day where they're thinking, well, I don't have to do as much. So those fail safes are there if something sneaks past us, why we're intentionally searching to do the right thing, not when we're working in a passive fashion. So with that said, I think team complacency does happen when you rely too much on someone else to pick up the grunt work. Cause is a strong team dynamic, overconfidence in team capabilities. The officer's perspective, officers might believe their teammates will catch any mistake, leading to reduced personal vigilance. Sergeant lieutenant perspective, supervisors may trust their team to handle issues collectively, not emphasizing individual accountability. And you know what's funny? I got to mention something on that real quick. When you emphasize on the team collectively, it does defer individualized responsibility, because then people will say, well, it's a team effort. It's a team effort. That's why as supervisors, I do hold individuals accountable as part of the team. Therefore, they know what they have to contribute. So they can't defer any responsibility to the greater team as a whole. They know exactly what their contribution is to the team. And that's not just through one department. That's through multiple departments to help the house. Everybody knows how their contribution matters, both on a departmental level, but also on an individualized level. I will say as prison management, I will translate the departmental contribution to the supervisors, but then I expect the supervisors to translate the individualized contributions. So everybody knows specifically where their role is, where their responsibility lies, so they can't defer it. For prison management, management may see team complacency as a cultural issue where accountability is diffused. I just said that. They might encourage individual responsibility alongside teamwork. And why intentionality and purpose matter. Encouraging intentional accountability ensures that each team member understands their role and responsibility. While teamwork is essential, knowing that individual actions matter and contribute to the overall success of the team helps maintain high standards. This approach prevents over-reliance on others and ensures that everyone is actively engaged and vigilant. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, you know, my biggest contribution to that subject is never rely on somebody else to catch something that you've seen with your own eyes. If you see it, do something about it. Don't rely on somebody else to take care of it for you, especially if it hasn't been verbally stated. You know, there are lots of times where we get into the grunt or the role of our everyday shift, and you know, one person may see something, they just may be too damn busy to address it. It may be something minor, and they, you know, rely on somebody else who may have more time on their hands, you know, to come down there and address it at some point. You know, never let your team get complacent in their duties. Always, always make them aware and make them feel comfortable with the fact that they see something, they need to let somebody know. If it's something they can take care of on their own without a supervisor's help, by all means, please do. But if it's something you think may turn into an issue or a problem, let a supervisor know. Don't just stay silent about it and expect somebody else to deal with it. It could get somebody hurt, especially if it's something that, you know, something that you can head off in the process. You know, or the biggest thing is that, you know, you don't want your team to be complacent. You want them to be engaged. You want them to be interactive with you. You want them to be vigilant and on their toes at all times. And, you know, the only way that's going to happen is if you actually practice the process of being all those with your team and allowing your team to be that with you. There's sometimes I've done stuff that, you know, one of my officers say, "Hey, Lou, hold on before you do that, man. Hold on. Let's take a step back and think about it." And, you know, and my mindset, you know, I was already at my conclusion, but thankfully I had some damn good officers that had my back as much as I had theirs. And, you know, they've kept me out of trouble just as much as I've kept them out of trouble.
Yeah, and guys, the individualized effort leads to the collective whole. And this actually is going to go right into the next one, which is cultural competency, cultural complacency. With that said, cultural complacency is accepting negative or unproductive culture as normal. Causes is longstanding norms. And we talked about that today. You got to make sure that complacent habits don't become practice that later eventually turn into routine, in which people don't even know anymore what policy and procedure is versus practice because it's so routine. And then you have lack of leadership initiative. And it also deals with resistance to change. Officers' perspective is officers might adapt the attitude that this is how things are, feeling powerless to instigate change. Sergeant lieutenant perspective, supervisors may perpetuate. I hate that word.
Perpetuate.
I know what it means. Yeah, perpetuate. There it is. I know what that word is. Supervisors may perpetuate cultural complacency by not challenging outdated norms, focusing on monitoring the status quo. And prison management perspective, management must address cultural complacency by promoting a culture of accountability, encouraging innovation, and supporting staff who challenge unproductive norms. Now, why intentionality and purpose? Intentional leadership that actively promotes a positive, productive culture is crucial for combating complacency. When leaders purposely engage with staff, model desired behaviors, and encourage constructive feedback, they set the tone for the entire facility. This approach helps create an environment where complacency is not tolerated and continuous improvement is valued. Guys, remember, the facility, most facilities may have a habit of falling back to what's easy, what's a little bit more laxed, and it's up to good supervisors, but also on us as frontline to really keep good momentum fueled, be intentional with our efforts, be engaged, and don't allow the facility to fall back to what is easy. Don't allow the facility to fall back into complacent habits. I do love what it says here, where if you don't have someone actively stopping the facility from falling back, the culture will fall back to what's easy. It is what it is. I mean, who wants to go into work, dealing with conflict all day and challenges? A lot of people may just want to sit back and not have to deal with conflict. So what they do is they selfishly avoid them, not realizing that in our efforts to be productive, we have to constantly deal with conflict and challenges, because the moment we don't, the moment we accept them is the moment the facility starts to go into what is most convenient and sadly most complacent. So with that said, I have seen negative culture tear down facilities. Sometimes when you see like these concerns in the news where in one case you have developed undue relationships. And let's say in the one case that we were going over recently with the Casey White and I forget the woman, the one that got caught up. My mind's going blank here, but with that said, sometimes when you look into it, you find that the practices are not correct. And then you find out, wow, people really settled back in doing things that are basic. And at the end, at the end of it all, it's like, wow, this wasn't just one incident that you could truly hold these two people responsible. You also have the culture that allowed it to exist. That's the biggest concern. You have the basics in play, so the culture helps deal with any dynamic that goes against what the facility expects, what we expect. But the moment we don't enforce that dynamic, the moment we passively accept the job as just another day, nothing's going to happen, is the moment everything shifts against us to the point is we don't know what's right and what's wrong. We don't know if practice is policy or if policy is practice. We just have learned to accept things the way they are to the point where it becomes extremely confusing. And sadly enough, the more you start to accept it, the more you start to justify it, the more you start to believe in it. And now the conflict, your experience that used to tell you something doesn't feel right, but you've been not paying attention to it much anymore, just pushing it down, it no longer gives you that push. And when that experience inside you, that gut feeling no longer gives you that push, then you just slowly start, this is it. This is the way things operate. And then someone from the outside, sadly, will have to come in after something happens and smack the facility around. And I would go as far as saying immediately getting rid of leadership, because leadership is there for the number one priority is to not let that type of culture exist. Their job is the moment that happens is to keep fighting and making sure it goes in the opposite direction of cultural complacency. That means you deal with the conflict, you deal with the challenges, and you're coming to work every day knowing that I have to maintain a high level of effectiveness, which means that I cannot let the facility do what it wants to do. I have to make sure that I keep my people on point and that we're operating at the highest level of effectiveness at all times. Cultural complacency, that's one of the concerns I think a lot of facilities have, because when it gets to the point where they accept it, Joe, they no longer know that they're doing anything wrong.
Yeah, and there's been times that has been done for so long that somebody actually has to go back and reread the policy to find out if they're actually doing it right or not. and they find out that, they're not. Leadership, for every facility is damn sure responsible for setting the tone of the facility. If you got the right leadership at a facility, I'm telling you, you will always be on your toes. You will always be challenged. You will always be accepted. And prior to my retirement, I had two styles of leadership, and the one I had prior to my last administration were top notch. These were the people, the warden and the assistant wardens, and even the majors were ones that, if something needed to be done, they knew we were tied up, they would get out there and get their hands dirty and do it for us, escorts, whatever the case is. Or, the warden, she'd get on the radio, hey, LT, while you're doing that, I'll go run chow. You go ahead and take care of your business. And, this is the same warden that would, engage us as leaders, as leadership and supervision. They would come to our shift briefings and ask questions from the different officers just to see if they had a may not be the correct answer, but a decent answer. They just want to know that they've been engaged in different subjects. So if they found that they weren't being engaged, then us lieutenants got our asses handed to us, for not being more interactive with our staff, to keep them on their toes. They wanted to run drills. We did, cell extractions. We've done fire drills. We've done, escape scenarios, just all kinds of things that would make not just the officers think about what needs to happen or what's going on, but it also gave the supervisors a oh shit moment. Like, man, I haven't even looked at this. It could be as simple as bar and window checks. Walking by and testing the integrity of your bars and your cell blocks, testing the integrity of the screen mesh that's on your cells and segregation. It's one of those where it all goes good until it doesn't, and then it's an oh shit moment. Having the right leadership that keeps the staff engaged, in a definite two-way conversation, not just one way, because a two-way conversation is much more productive than a one-way conversation, and, of course, the last administration I had, from the last, I guess, 6 months of my tour before I retired, was not engageful, unless something was wrong, and it was always to the negative. OT was not appreciated. It was, was mandated, not appreciated, expected. It's your job. I've seen, in this case, we went from a 93% staffed unit down to a 48% staffed unit within a matter of 6 months. And that was losing 7 lieutenants, 2 captains, 3 sergeants, to go to other facilities because they just couldn't take the administration anymore. So keeping your people engaged, keeping them trained, keeping them on their toes, being appreciated for what they do, is everything. And if you have the right leadership, the leadership is ultimately responsible for setting the tone to the subordinates underneath them. And, keeping them engaged, keeping them trained is there for a reason, because when things really do happen, they automatically know. It just becomes a memory process to them. It's muscle memory, especially when it comes to dealing with like fights or escapes. If something were to happen, they automatically know what they need to do. They don't have to rely on supervision to tell them what to do. Why? Because we've engaged with them. We've trained them. We've ran these scenarios with them. We've kept them interactive. It means I can't stress it enough how much it means.
Well, I love what you're saying, Joe, because that means you're setting the default in the right direction.
Absolutely.
The default is the automatic response, and you got to make sure your facility knows where that automatic response needs to be headed. It needs to be an active, engaged response and not a laid back response. So I think that's another good reason to make sure you are actively maintaining good momentum, because if it's going in the other direction, once it settles, the automatic response, the default response from the facility won't be an active response. It will be a very passive, laissez-faire response. The last one we have is competency for micromanagement. I want to say something. When I say that management has to get involved and be engaged, I mean they got to keep people inspired, people motivated. But when they're delegating the what, they allow the people to say how. They allow the people to develop the how, get them invested. That is their effort to keep things moving forward. Micromanagement is the point that stops momentum. And it gets to the point where people just become reliant on you, the manager, or you, the supervisor, to make the decision. And there's complacency in that because people won't take the initiative because they've gotten so comfortable with you making the decision for them. So this is staff becoming passive or overly reliant on instruction due to a micromanaged environment. The causes for this are feeling of restricted autonomy, over control for supervisors, and then obviously with over control is a disengagement. Officers' perspective is officers may become overly dependent on supervisors for direction and hesitate to take initiative, leading to reduced critical thinking, lack of innovation at that point too. Sergeant's lieutenant perspective, supervisors may become overly involved in day-to-day tasks, leaving little room for officers to make decisions, which can lead to a lack of engagement and personal responsibility. Prison management perspective, management might recognize that micromanagement stifles initiative and autonomy, leading to a culture where staff do not feel empowered to act independently. And then why intentionality and purpose matter. Intentional leadership that empowers staff encourages them to take initiative and make decisions. By fostering a culture where autonomy is valued and staff are trusted to perform their duties, management can reduce the negative effects of micromanagement. This approach helps staff feel valued and engaged, reducing the likelihood of complacency. Hey guys, I want to mention something, and I've read this in a book once, where the people that have the authority may not have all the information, and the people that have the information may not have all the authority. And that's where you got to allow, like Joe said, the exchange between both parties, because the people that have the information may be in the best position to figure out what needs to be done. Now, if you decide that you want to micromanage them in every effort that they take, they're either decide not to speak up because who's listening to them anyway, or just not want to speak up. I don't need to. Why do I want that responsibility when someone's going to go ahead and step over me anyway? So I'm going to feel comfortable with knowing that at the end of the day, I'm not responsible for any decisions. And in corrections, that's tough, because in corrections, you need decision makers for many reasons. But as you move up, you'll realize that you're going to be spread so thin with the amount of responsibility that you have that you need to empower people. You need an empowered workforce, because if you don't have it, you're going to be making decisions that are way outside of your area of expertise. Because even as you move further up, even if my expertise was as an officer, once you're in management, you're far removed from the day-to-day that they're dealing with. So you may have once been that officer, but you're not today, and you won't be tomorrow. So with that said, you got to be able to empower them, because they're in the best position to make that decision. And also when you move up, you also start taking on areas that you've never had experience in. So therefore, if you're not empowering them, you may not be in the best position to make decisions for them. So my thing is, and I love this lesson, is I'll give you the what and the why, because I want to be transparent. You figure out the how. And then within the how, I want to see empowered decision-making. This way, the people that have the information now also have the authority. So you don't delegate tasks, you delegate the authority to complete the task. And once that happens, the momentum just moves and moves and moves. I know a lot of people think that when they take on a new position or they cross into a higher position, they got to problem solve. I think you don't problem solve, you expand good momentum. Look at what's working and expand it, and watch as the momentum starts taking out problems that you thought were unsolvable. Because again, when you start moving up, guys, it's not about the management of tasks, but rather the management of people. And when you know how to manage people correctly, you could create some crazy momentum in which problems that you thought, as I said, were impossible to solve get swept up in positive momentum and find out they solve themselves. What's your thoughts on all this, Joe?
Yeah, micromanagement's always been a sore subject for me. Micromanagement to me has always been an automatic fail. Micromanagement takes all the trust and the value from your employees. And if you don't have trust and value in your employees or from your employees, you don't have employees. You have robots, ones that won't make decisions, ones that won't take initiative. And it just clogs the chain up. It really does. It causes you to have to go down 2 levels to find out what's going on because you've micromanaged your frontline supervision, or you're micromanaging the frontline staff. Delegating some of your tasks to the lower level serves a purpose. Yes, they may fail, but they're also going to gain experience from it. Let them. That's how we gain experience, over trial and error. You know, micromanaging them, all you're doing is giving yourself a stomach ulcer, because, you know, as you climb the ranks, you don't have the time to be responsible for something at the frontline level. You know, you got other things that need to be done. You have sergeants underneath you. You know, if you're a lieutenant, you got sergeants underneath you that are capable, and you have officers underneath you that are capable, whether you know they're capable or not, because you haven't given them the chance because you're too busy micromanaging. You're telling them what to do. You're telling them how to do it. Let them figure that out. Let them gain the experience by trial and error. You know, if I went to work every day and had a foot on my neck, you know, at some point I'd be like, hey, you know what? You do it. You know, you just go ahead and do it. You know, micromanaging doesn't serve a purpose. It never ends well. And ultimately you wind up losing trust and value in employees that, you know, could be some of your best damn workhorses that, you know, may have the capability of doing things way above their experience. You know, they may surprise you, but you need to give them the chance to do it.
Yeah, and when it comes to delegating, guys, I mean, obviously you look for competency and integrity, but when you come to micromanage, it stagnates. It breaks us away from innovation. So again, that's where we wind up becoming complacent, and we become complacent in new ideas and changes that could only come from people that are doing the job, that, you know, are probably coming up with systems that work better, but you're not listening to them because you're making every decision for them. And then eventually they stop talking. I mean, it's that simple. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, you know, hopefully you guys have gained something from this episode. You know, complacency is rampant now, you know, due to short staffing, and I understand we as individuals are the ones that need to get ourselves out of it. It starts with us first, and then it starts with, you know, holding our people accountable. You know, get them out of being complacent. You know, the ultimate thing you need to keep in mind, especially if you're, you know, frontline supervision, such as a sergeant or lieutenant. Complacency kills. Complacency causes harm. Complacency causes escapes. You know, in our agency, complacency caused an escape and 5 murders from the same escapee. I mean, complacency is one of the worst words in my vocabulary. So do whatever you can possible, A, to keep yourself from being complacent as a supervisor, and B, keeping your staff from being complacent. Like I said, you know, complacency is bad right now, and I understand we're short staffed, but there's nothing justifiable in complacency when the scenario goes bad. So do whatever you can to break the cycle, break the habit for yourself and for your staff.
I agree. And guys, I mean, there's not really much I can top there. Joe, you hit it spot on. Complacency is something we need to be aware of. It does sneak up on you. So we've given you 13 areas where you could fall complacent in, the reasons why. And there's just so much information in this dialogue. So I hope you guys watch it in its entirety, understand the context. And as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Please, if you haven't, subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.